The air in the docking bay was thick with the scent of oil and rust as the heavy, automated doors to Station 13 groaned open. The faint whirring of decaying machinery was the only sound to greet Jason as he stepped onto the metal floor. His boots clanged with each step, the reverberation echoing down the deserted hallways. This station, long abandoned, felt like a forgotten ghost ship lost in the void of space. The flickering lights above did little to alleviate the sense of unease creeping over him. It had been years since the last crew had departed. According to the records, Station 13 had been left for a reason. Something had gone wrong. Details were scarce, but the official reports hinted at something sinister, an unknown event that led to the crew's sudden evacuation. Jason had heard the stories, but he was a man of logic. Yet now, standing on this forsaken station, even his logical mind was beginning to feel the chill of uncertainty. His mission was simple: respond to the distress signal. The signal had been weak at first, static-filled and barely audible, but unmistakable. A cry for help, or perhaps something worse. The crew was long gone, so what could possibly remain? Jason took a slow breath, forcing himself to push away his growing doubts. "Focus," he muttered to himself. "Find the signal. Find the crew." He set off, the sound of his steps reverberating in the vast empty halls. The walls of Station 13, once gleaming with advanced technology, were now marred by time. Panels of machinery were darkened with age, wires hung loosely from their mounts, and the floor beneath his boots was scattered with rust and debris. Yet there was something strange in the atmosphere, an unsettling presence that seemed to press in on him from all sides. As he navigated through the winding corridors, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The space around him felt oddly intimate, as though the very walls of the station were watching him. He tried to shake off the thought, but the feeling lingered. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crackle of static from overhead speakers and the low hum of the station's failing power system. Jason paused at an intersection, his gaze scanning the hallway. It was like a maze, endless, twisting hallways that seemed to lead to nowhere, each one colder than the last. His instincts screamed at him, but he continued on, telling himself that there was nothing to fear. He had been trained for this. But then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They echoed from behind him. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, eyes darting across the dimly lit corridor, but saw nothing. No movement, no sign of life. The eerie sound of footsteps, however, continued. He shook his head, trying to calm his nerves. "Just the station settling," he muttered under his breath, though the words did little to reassure him. As he continued deeper into the station, the corridors began to feel more confining, the walls narrowing, the shadows lengthening. He had expected decay, overturned chairs, scattered equipment, but instead the station seemed almost alive. The walls felt warmer now, warmer than they should have been, as if they had been recently touched. Jason's hand brushed against the surface of one wall as he moved forward, the metal smooth beneath his fingers, but then a sudden jolt. Electricity surged through his hand, an unexpected shock that caused him to jerk back, heart racing. The sensation lingered, an uncomfortable tingle that spread across his skin. Jason swallowed hard, trying to calm himself, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. And then, the footsteps. They were closer now. Jason broke into a sprint, his boots pounding against the metal floor as he ran. The sound of his breath filled his ears, but the slow, steady footsteps behind him grew louder, closer. It was as if the station itself were alive, breathing, closing in on him. He rounded another corner and came to a sudden stop. The room ahead, the control room, was dimly lit, a single light flickering overhead. There in the center of the room was a chair, surrounded by yellow handprints smeared across the walls. They were strange, these handprints, too vivid, too deliberate. They looked fresh. Jason's pulse quickened. The crew had left years ago, but these marks, these handprints, were unmistakable. He moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. The scent of stale sweat clung to the air, mingling with the smell of something else, something foul. As his eyes scanned the room, he noticed the control panel near the center of the room, the familiar blinking lights. But there, beside the console, was another handprint, small, yellow, and it wasn't on the wall. Jason's breath hitched in his throat as his hand instinctively rose to touch his neck. His fingers brushed against something cold, something damp. He pulled his hand away and looked at his fingers. Yellow. The print was faint but unmistakable. A chill ran down his spine and his pulse hammered in his chest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, and he was overwhelmed by a sensation, a memory, or perhaps a warning. Something was watching him. Suddenly a sound, a soft shuffle, came from the darkness beyond the light. Jason's head whipped around. His heart froze. In the shadows, something moved. A figure, faint and indistinct, shifting toward him. The figure was slow, dragging its feet, but there was no mistaking it now. It was there, and it was coming for him. Jason's legs moved before his mind could catch up. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The figure stepped into the light, its form becoming clearer. Pale, its skin a sickly yellow hue. Its face was a void. No eyes, no mouth. Just a hollow, empty mask. The air around Jason thickened, the temperature plummeting as the figure reached out, its skeletal hand cold and clammy. The smell of rot filled the air. Jason's chest tightened as the figure's hand closed around his shoulder, its touch sending a sharp, icy sting through his body. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor. The figure leaned in close, its breath foul and rancid against his ear. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered. The voice was rasping, unnatural, as though it had not spoken in years. His mind screamed for him to run, to escape, but his body refused to obey. He felt himself being pulled, dragged closer to the figure, into the shadows. Jason's mind was a swirling mess of panic and disbelief as the shadows closed in around him. He could feel the coldness seeping into his very bones, the grip on his shoulder like a vice, unyielding and inhuman. His eyes darted frantically in the darkness, struggling to find something, anything, to hold on to. The figure's presence grew overwhelming. It was as though it wasn't just in the room with him, but inside him, filling his chest, pressing against his ribs, suffocating him. The air felt thick, tainted with a sickening stench that clung to his clothes, his skin, his very soul. His heart hammered in his chest, but his legs remained frozen, as if the very act of moving had become impossible. The figure's grip tightened. With a force that seemed to bend time itself, it dragged him backward, deeper into the shadows. He could no longer see the flickering light of the control room. All that remained was the suffocating darkness, pressing in from all sides. His head swam, thoughts fragmenting into incoherent flashes of fear and confusion. How had it gotten so close? How had it found him? The thing leaned closer, and Jason could feel its breath, icy and damp, brushing against the side of his neck. The voice came again, a rasping whisper that vibrated through his very core. "You were never meant to find us." Jason's pulse raced as his mind screamed for him to break free. He couldn't let this thing pull him into whatever darkness awaited. The air was thick with dread, and the walls seemed to close in around him, the sound of his breath, shallow and ragged, mingling with the echo of his footsteps. But there was no escape. Not here. Not now. A flash of memory struck him, a moment before he entered the station. A warning from his superior, a single line in the report that he had dismissed. "Don't enter Station 13. The distress signal is a trap." But it was too late. The figure's touch burned him, a cold fire that crawled up his spine, into his veins, into his very soul. Every fiber of his being screamed to fight, but his body betrayed him. His muscles ached with the weight of an invisible force, as though something was pressing him down, weighing him into submission. In the darkness, a soft laugh, low, drawn out, and hollow, reverberated through the chamber. It came from the figure, but it was as if the laugh echoed from every corner of the station itself. It was laughing at him. Suddenly, the grip on his shoulder released. Jason gasped, falling to the cold, hard ground. He scrambled to get to his feet, eyes wild, scanning for any sign of escape. But the shadows had deepened, and the space around him was no longer familiar. The control room was gone, replaced by a vast, empty expanse as though the entire station had warped into an endless abyss. And then he saw it. At the far end of the room, standing in the shadows, was another figure. It was the same, a pale, yellow-skinned wraith, its hollow eyes fixed upon him. But this one was different. Its eyes gleamed with a sickly light, and its hand was raised as if waiting to welcome him into its cold, eternal embrace. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he realized something. This wasn't just one wraith, it was many. The walls around him began to shift and distort, the station itself bending and warping, as if the very structure of reality had begun to unravel. The hum of the failing power system grew louder, a maddening crescendo that rattled his bones. And through it all, the yellow handprints, those dreadful handprints, began to appear on the walls, the floors, the ceiling. Everywhere. Jason's pulse raced as he stumbled backward, his legs trembling beneath him. The first wraith was getting closer, its hollow eyes never leaving his face, its thin lips curling into a grotesque smile. And then a voice, clearer now, sounded not from one wraith, but from many. You are ours now. A jolt of terror surged through him as the yellow handprints began to glow, a faint, sickly light emanating from their center. The air grew heavier, thick with the stench of decay, as the temperature plummeted to an unbearable chill. Jason tried to scream, but his throat constricted, his voice strangled by a force beyond his understanding. The station seemed to close in on him from all directions, the walls folding inward, the darkness swallowing everything. It was too late. As the wraiths surrounded him, their eyes burning with an unnatural hunger, Jason's mind began to unravel. His thoughts, his identity, all seemed to slip away like sand through his fingers. He tried to hold on to reality, to fight, but the wraiths had already claimed him. Their touch, cold and clammy, crawled under his skin, and as they closed in, a strange, suffocating sense of peace washed over him. For in the end, Jason was not the first to enter Station 13, nor would he be the last. The distress signal faded once more, swallowed by the vast emptiness of space. The handprints remained, yellow, smeared, as though someone or something had left its mark. Station 13 was empty once again, but it would not remain so for long, and the yellow wraith was waiting. The end.